All right, folks, I think we'll get in and get started. We have some super interesting stuff for you all today. Um, we are recording this meeting. Let me start with this. And we don't quite know exactly yet if we are going to publish a full recording or if we're just going to use it for notes at the end. But we wanted a way to kind of capture the conversation so that we can share it with those who cannot attend with us in person afterwards. So hello and welcome to the very first Focus Friday. It is lovely to see you. If you call this Friday Focus, that is okay because I will intermittently change this between Focus Friday and Friday Focus, as you might have seen in the very first video that we posted where I hit it about 50-50. Um, we wanted to design a session type that basically would allow us to just kind of come together and chat about some of the different situations in higher education and work through some of the things that we're thinking about together in a collaborative way, in a way that allows us to share and learn from each other, and also to hang out and meet new people and be able to connect across the sector because we don't always get the space and time and opportunity to do that. And what better way than on a Friday afternoon? What else would you rather do on a Friday afternoon than come hang out with us, right? Um, this is the first one, and the topics from here on out probably will, not probably, they will be a little bit more focused. But I wanted to start the first one on what is the future of higher education, which, admittedly doesn't really seem like a focused question at all. But we have been working here at Higher Education Strategy Associates, with RBC and Business Higher Education Roundtable on a slate of roundtables across the summer, basically asking people about what they think post-secondary will and should look like in 2035 and how do we get there. So we've been across the country from Halifax to Vancouver and a whole bunch in the middle, talking to industry, government, and post-secondary leaders about how do we actually get here. And a lot of really great things from those conversations emerged. And that comes down to the things that are great and cohesive and collaborative. Like, how do we actually drive a post-secondary system that is innovation driven and inclusive? And how do we lean into an economy that is less resource intensive and more knowledge intensive? And also highlighted a lot of challenges that I'm sure we're all probably quite familiar of and experience in different ways. So, things like how do we navigate within our current funding agreements? How do we navigate within policy changes that we've seen over the year? Um, all of that type of stuff. So I have with me two lovely guests who I'm excited to join, two of the people who have been on this project for the summer as well as myself. So we have Jackie Pichette, the Director of Skills Policy at RBC Thought Leadership, and Sunny Chan, the Senior Content Specialist at Business Higher Education Roundtable. And I really don't think I introduced myself. I'm Tiffany MacLennan. I'm a Senior Research Associate here at HESA. And I will be your host every other Friday for the next year of your life. So I'm happy that you could join us. And Jackie and Sunny, thank you in particular for joining us. Now, how this is going to work, we have about the first 24 minutes now, because I'm going over, for questions for Jackie and Sunny, and then we'll open it up to you to kind of give your thoughts and perspectives and answer some questions. So if Jackie, Sunny, you're okay, we can hop in.
Okay.
All right, this is to both of you, and we'll go Sunny first and then Jackie. Um, the roundtables that we were at over the summer asked a really central question. What must Canada's skills and education system look like to have a thriving economy in 2035? How would each of you answer that? We'll start with Sunny.
Thanks, Tiffany. Thanks so much for having me. Just a quick note before we start. I'm from the Business and Higher Education Roundtable. I'm going to condense that to BHER, BHER. That's how we say our org name. So just so you guys all know, that's what I'm referring to from now on. And I would say that the number one thing I heard most often at all of the summer roundtables and also at a lot of the other events that BHER has convened leaders at in the past few years is that Canada's post-secondary system is in need of really big changes to the way that it's funded, how that funding gets spent, who gets to say how that funding gets spent, how it's governed, both in the sense of governed externally from the government and also internally structured. And I've heard it said a lot, like time and time again, that post-secondary leaders don't really have the freedom to make any of those changes. And most stakeholders involved are just very like culturally scared of big changes. So to ensure the kinds of changes that education and post-secondary skilling will need to contribute to a thriving economy, it's become really clear to me that the first thing we basically have to do is get everybody a lot more comfortable with the idea of change and evolution. But I also think that this appetite for change will get better, will develop once we see some returns on the early first changes that we make. So when we see better employment outcomes or better skills articulation, when we see more sustainable institutions, we just need to make those first few changes and it'll become easier to swallow for everyone. That's how I see it. How about you, Jackie?
Thanks, Annie. Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think it's really fair that you're asking us, Tiffany, after we've asked so many people across the country this exact question over the summer. Um, I don't want to duplicate what Sunny said, so I'll try and almost be a bit more personal with my answer. I listen to CBC radio every morning as I'm getting myself and my son fed, having breakfast for the day. Um, Lately, I hear about post-secondary pretty often in the news. I hope 10 years from now, when I'm listening to the morning news, I hear stories about colleges and universities launching exciting new programs, working with industry to make sure those programs are super relevant and aligned with current job needs. Um, that there are innovative learning opportunities for people of all ages, that there's research projects happening on university and college campuses that help communities tackle real problems and put Canada on a world stage as a leader. I hope in 10 years that I hear more stories like that and fewer stories about program cuts, canceled projects, layoffs that honestly make me wonder what kind of pathways are going to be available to my son. Um, I'll also plug that I did do my best to answer this question in a less personal way, in more detail, in a report that RBC Thought Leadership released last week. It's called Testing Times, and it's up on our website. So that's at RBC Thought Leadership. And I'm sure I'll cover a lot of the ideas in that report today, but there's a lot more detail there online.
Absolutely. And we'll send that report out actually after this so that you all have a copy of it. Jackie, I am going to stick with you though. From the RBC side, now, some people might think that RBC kind of isn't really a traditional player in the higher ed space. But you've been looking at higher education through kind of a lens of economic transformation and national prosperity. Um, from our conversations this summer, what do you think were some of the most striking insights and challenges that stood out to you, kind of using this lens?
Yeah, thanks, Tiffany. And fair enough. I think I had that same question when I joined. But RBC, to be fair, has a really important stake in how Canada's economy functions. It's in the bank's interest to see a thriving economy, and so we're invested in supporting that. And human capital is hugely important in that equation. But to answer your question, so most striking insights or challenges that stood out to me, we actually held an event this week on Monday, exploring post-secondary's role in Canada's economic transformation. So we're hearing a lot from the federal government right now about nation building, needing to pivot and reorient the economy. So this event focused on three federal priorities that will depend on skills and innovation as a focus for a conversation about reform. And those were defense and space, technology like AI, and major energy projects. So I was in the conversation about major energy projects. And what stood out for me is just how far apart our country's energy needs and ambitions are on the one hand. So we've got a major projects office with 5 proposed projects, most of which are energy focused. So that's on the one hand, this ambition. And then this real serious shortage of workers in the energy sector, and the need for post-secondary programs to align and help meet those needs, on the other hand. So there's a real gap, and there's a real urgency. I heard that we need industry to support colleges and universities in meeting that gap. They need to share job numbers, specific skill needs, and help design programs with work integrated learning opportunities. I heard that we need Canadians to be a lot more aware of these opportunities, that there are well-paying, highly skilled roles that are waiting to be filled in areas like engineering, project management, and skilled trades in particular, related to these projects.
Thank you so much. And Sunny, from BHER's perspective, you folks are quite close to the employer side of the equation. How are companies and industry and kind of our sectoral leaders seeing higher education right now? And do they want more or less of?
So yes, one major trend that we've seen and I have seen, if you take a more zoomed out kind of view of the timeline, is that a lot of companies and employers are now like more fully bought into the work integrated learning concept, or WIL for short. So almost 10 years ago, our members at BHER committed to the goal of making sure that 100% of post-secondary students in Canada get access to at least one WIL opportunity before graduating. And compared to that 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, we've seen huge attitude shifts in employer perception, student perception, public perception of WIL. It used to be a lot more necessary to make an argument for WIL first. So you trot out all the statistics about why it's so beneficial for companies to have access to student talent, the productivity gains, the talent pipeline development, you get fresh new ideas, etc. So nowadays, I find the conversation doesn't have to start at that place of convincing people about WIL as much anymore. So I'd say many employers already agree that WIL is great and necessary. So now we're talking more about building the infrastructure for sustainable WIL partnerships with higher education, so that it's not like so ad hoc and companies don't have to start all over again, trying to figure out who to talk to about hiring students if an HR person leaves or your university contact leaves. So we're talking about also the integrated part of work integrated learning more. So how to get employers more involved in the curriculum and the teaching side of things with post-secondary. And I think it's a really exciting and promising shift. We really want to keep that momentum going and have employers genuinely collaborate with higher education more.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that you say that too. I think I used that direct quote to someone the other day that, we don't really have to convince people anymore that this is like a good investment and that now it's about kind of expanding and broadening and bettering, if you will, kind of as we go through it. Jackie, one of the strongest recommendations that we heard coast to coast was the need to modernize the academy in terms of programming, services, etc. So that ranged from, how do you move pieces of paper across a desk to how do you keep up with AI in the workforce and how do you train students to it? So from your perspective, what does this imperative kind of look like and what changes either policy or incentives, I guess, is needed to drive that change?
Thanks, Stephanie. It's a good question. Yeah, the AI idea especially came up a lot. And following the roundtables, I actually also had one-on-one interviews with industry leaders across the country. And again, like I guess I shouldn't have been as surprised as I was, but it kept coming up in kind of a rattling way for me, to be honest. I'm hearing that across industries, workplaces are already using AI, and if they're not, they're planning to immediately. increasingly expecting staff to be able to use it. So that means a lot of people are suddenly expected to know how to use AI appropriately and effectively in their roles. They need to know what tools to turn to, how to leverage them appropriately, what the risks are, and how to avoid those risks. So when we say that post-secondary needs to integrate AI and modernize, we're not really talking about creating AI specific programs. We're talking about across the board integrating AI like we integrate transferable skills, creative thinking, critical thinking, those sorts of things. We need to be integrating AI literacy as something that every student is gaining as part of the post-secondary experience. Um, and the roundtables highlighted that's not happening. In fact, we're kind of hearing the opposite, that universities and colleges are being really cautious. Overall, there's certainly exceptions, but in terms of how AI is being integrated into programs, and caution is definitely important here, but so is urgency. And we kind of need to find that balance and make sure that the sector is responding and setting students up for success when they graduate. And not only that, they should be catering to lifelong learners who suddenly have this new expectation thrust upon them and need to understand how to leverage these tools.
Absolutely. And you can even see examples of that in some places in the state. So Ohio State, for example, I think is the first institution, at least on my radar, who has mandated a flat AI fluency for all their students. So they kind of took away from the program approach. I don't think they're actually offering any programming in AI, but are mandating that all of their students pick up at least fluency and literacy in AI overall. Jackie, I am going to stick with you for a minute, though. Another thing that we heard, and I'm sure nobody in this room will be slightly shocked, is that funding model misalignment came up in every part of the country over and over. Um, and that ranged for a lot of reasons from kind of what it incentivizes, so volume over quality or specialization, duplication. What kind of funding reforms do you think would actually incentivize the change that we need to see?
Yeah, no pressure with that one. Ultimately, we heard loud and clear that colleges and universities across Canada need more money. Um, that's a hard pitch to make to government when elementary schools and hospitals need more money too. But if we want our economy to grow and for Canada to be globally competitive, we need a strong post-secondary sector. So I think there is a strong case for more public funding. There's also a strong case for more flexible tuition. So removing caps, giving institutions more liberty to set fair prices for their programs and services, and making sure that there are strong student financial assistance programs in place so that um, an inevitable increase in tuition prices does not make the system inaccessible across the country. Because, like I said, especially in specific areas, there's real shortages, and we need as many people as possible still able to access the post-secondary system. We heard from roundtable participants that this idea of tuition flexibility probably would also help incentivize program changes that are aligned with student needs and expectations, and give institutions that extra push to modernize in step with the world outside of their doors.
Absolutely. It's interesting to be on this side of the table now. So I went into the higher ed system as a first generation low income student who was very dependent on student loans. Um, and I ended up going into student leadership and landed on the side of advocating for Nova Scotia's tuition cap. So we were the student lobby organization who was saying, no, you have to cap tuition. And it's funny now being on the other side and seeing kind of the ripple effects and the outcomes of that, and what that can actually do to a system. And I think now I would tell younger me this, that maybe this wasn't the smart idea, but also a deregulation without increasing student financial aid is also not the best move. I have to slide it in. Sunny, I am going to move over to you. Another challenge that we heard, it was industry institution partnerships and how a lot of the times they're transactional rather than partnerships, which you kind of leaned into already, or project based as opposed to like a sustained partnership. How do we move from that kind of transactional to transformational industry institution partnerships?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Tiffany. I'm just gonna take a moment to go respond to something Jackie said. So one more aspect of we need more funding, but if more funding is not coming, one more way we've been thinking about it at BHER is like, how can we change the way we use the existing funding more efficiently, move things around, try to magic those numbers around. So we have an upcoming thought leadership piece coming out about that soon in the next few weeks. So keep an eye out on our website, bher.ca, for that. So back to the question about industry partnerships not being transactional. Yes, I can tie that back into what I was saying before about how employers are starting to evolve past that need to like see that students, evolving past seeing students as basically really smart, cheap summer labor, and they're more interested in the concept of being actively involved in shaping the future of the workforce and, investing in their industry's talent pool. And part of our work at BHER is developing and scaling the will ecosystem in Canada. So we've successfully facilitated over 70,000 wills to date. That's 70,000. So what we've learned from doing that and observing, what works and what doesn't, is that the most successful partnerships are not projects with an end date. They're embedded partnerships. So we've seen examples like industry team projects that are jointly led by employers and instructors as part of a course, and that would renew with every cohort every semester. Or, regional association workforce agencies of SMEs together and navigate the post-secondary relationship with them so that they don't have to do it on their own year after year. So I think moving from transactional to transformational means moving from these kind of one-off partnerships and initiatives into designing intentionally and maintaining that ecosystem. And on the post-secondary side, I would want to say it takes some trust and openness to this new way of teaching and learning, to not be too cynical, because we've heard of academics being worried that companies just want to come in and corporatize all their curricula. So what we've ultimately seen is that a well-designed ecosystem is not about that at all. They're really about learning. And what we've actually done at BHER is we've written up a lot of these success examples as case studies and as reports. So again, if you go to our website, because I don't have infinite time, you can read way more in detail about these successful examples of embedded learning, and you can just check that out, bher.ca.
Sunny, I am going to stick with you on this next question. The other thing that came up over and over is kind of an erosion of public trust in institutions. Higher ed being seen as elitist or out of touch or not, kind of maintaining the value it once had. What role do you think employers, sectoral leaders, post-secondary institution leaders have in kind of helping rebuild that trust nationally?
Yeah, I at the roundtables hearing those leaders talk about the public loss of faith and like what is higher education even supposed to be for anymore? That was really eye-opening for me. And I think this question is interesting because my gut reaction was to like ask myself like, well, why would employers and sector leaders even want to help rebuild trust? Like, what's in it for them? Why would they feel responsible for playing a role in helping when it's the post-secondary's problem that they kind of need to dig themselves out of? So to answer that, two things really stick out in my mind that I've heard from industry leaders. So one is that a while ago, previous to the roundtables, I heard a leader call it a death spiral when an industry or a company feels like they don't want to invest that upfront cost, that time and resource into engaging with students or like graduate research or being part of teaching, because that eventually just leads to them having a thinner and thinner talent pool for their own industry sooner or later. And then the other thing that stuck out to me was that I heard a leader frame it as a kind of social responsibility, especially for like really big firms that have way more capacity to be involved in post-secondary education. I think even despite the erosion of trust, you would, if you look at all of the high level decision makers, it is very rare, probably, almost impossible to find someone who does not actually have a post-secondary credential of some kind, maybe a degree or a diploma, maybe just like a micro-credential certificate. Like the employers and sector leaders on that very basic level do agree there's some kind of value to this whole higher ed thing. And the idea of paying it forward for, the youth or a newcomer or a parent who's re-entering the workforce, that has an emotional resonance for a lot of people still. So those are my whys. You didn't ask why employers would help. I just needed to work that out for myself first. So as for how they can help, I think if institutions can do a better job of telling their impact stories about how many students, like not graduated, but instead how many students built careers, for example, or how much their research has been commercialized into marketable products, that makes it a lot easier for employers to champion those stories and to vouch for higher education. The loss of public trust comes from people feeling like post-secondary isn't giving them good returns, basically. So we have to rebuild that trust by one, actually having good returns first, and then two, telling the stories of those returns in tangible ways that matter to people.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that answer. And I appreciate the why and the how working through that you just gave. To both of you, and I'll start with Jackie. If you had a fast forward, and you touched on this in your opening answer, but I'm going to give it back to you again. If you had a fast forward to 2035, what would you want to be able to say that Canada got right about higher education?
One thing that I would love to be able to look back and say that we changed now and started getting right was lifelong learning. This isn't a new idea. It comes up a lot. It came up a lot at the roundtables. Post-secondary leaders speak a lot about lifelong learning, individual departments, especially continuing education. We hear a lot about it, but it's still really not the default. And we heard loud and clear that it really needs to be. People are no longer graduating programs and entering a career with one employer for the rest of their lives. But we kind of still treat education as though they do. So we're not just talking about, stacking credentials on top of one another. And although that's a great start. But how do we set up those initial building blocks, that initial learning experience to set people up for a lifetime of learning? How do credentials need to change? So, thinking about the way that we carry credentials, what they signal, how can we make that stacking more seamless and help people pivot into new sectors and new careers when they need to without having to go back and start from scratch? So yeah, I would love to be able to say that, wow, that's really when the sector took a hard look at how things need to change and started setting up systems and pathways to make that lifelong learning idea easy and rewarding.
Funny.
Yeah, I also have elements of the lifelong learning answer. I swear Jackie and I did not collude on this. This wasn't like a long con to talk about our new lifelong learning company. But yeah, in my ideal 2035, I would love to see that, that we've basically successfully transitioned away from this idea of post-secondary institutions being schools for 18 to 22-year-olds, and just moved on to post-secondaries being vital to communities as a whole. So there's that lifelong learning part of it where people can engage throughout their careers and their whole lives, and then also being part, like an active part of our country's economic strategy and sort of like being the lifeblood of our civic engagement. I want to be able to say we've evolved past basically this inherited model from ancient Greece to the Renaissance of, dissemination of knowledge from the wise teacher and instead becoming more like a networked community that actually serves 21st century needs. I was pretty inspired when I heard leaders at the roundtable talk about how our aging demographics, which we're always worrying about, are actually an opportunity to think about designing for longer lives. So people don't stop wanting to learn once they get a job or even once they retire, right? So I would love to be able to say in 2035 that we've actually taken that opportunity to redesign the ways we teach and learn because I think the economic and social impact of that would be much more significant than any incremental tinkering that we can do with like new course descriptions or new micro credentials. So that is the kind of transformation I optimistically say that we can look back on in the next 10 years.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you both for coming in and letting me pelt you with questions in front of an audience of about 100 people. I appreciate that very deeply.